Well, hello, everybody. I'm attorney Michael E. Lyon, and as most of you guys know, most of the videos I do have to do with government accountability operations, cop watching. Hold on, let me get a little bit better comms. Cop watching and basically First Amendment audits, holding the police accountable. But tonight, I'm going to talk about holding college professors, public school teachers, and the news media accountable. Now, most of you guys know that I am a libertarian. I definitely do not support the Nazis or Hitler. I have a biracial marriage. I have biracial kids. But one thing that I don't like is real misinformation and just lies that are constantly coming from the educational industrial complex, just nonstop lies and historical revisionism. And so tonight I saw this ridiculous video where people, from the left-wing media are saying that Donald Trump is a Nazi because he's having a rally in, I guess, Madison Square Garden. And they just came up with this complete and utter nonsense. And you know that it's almost like they're doing everything they can to get some whack job to take this dude out, right? Give me a bunch of ones if you think that they're literally trying to incite some crazy person to take him out. That's what I think is going on. And I'm just blown away by the whole thing. Hey, thanks. What's the matter, you? I hope you like it. I'm trying to be squared away tonight. And so just so y'all know, I'm not on here to try and support Donald Trump. Far be it from me to support any political candidate. I'm here because everything that you've been taught in school is a lie. Adolf Hitler was a member of the German Communist Party. Okay. And I'm going to show you some stuff that they don't teach you in our Marxist run school system. And I think after years and years of researching this, I think the reason why is because they're terrified that the truth is going to come out, that the religion of the public school system, the religion of Marxist college professors, which is Marxism, will be sullied if people find out that Hitler was really a Marxist. But he wasn't really he was a Marxist until he wasn't. Hitler became a German communist, where he supported a form of German nationalism. And we're going to get into all the conflations and misrepresentations about fascism and the fact that, well, if you're racist, that means you can't be a communist, which is nonsense, because we know Stalin and Karl Marx both hated Jews, even though Karl Marx was a Jew himself. So we're going to cover all that tonight. Hopefully we've got right, Floratella. So we're going to get into that because we know that the Marxists always accuse you of what they are, because that's right out of their playbook. It's just like right out of some Orwellian dystopian novel. When I see this stuff pop up, oh, Hitler's a Nazi, or I know Trump is a Nazi. But then I look at the people who are calling him a Nazi, and I look at the relationships, like the Democrat Party, for example, like they support abortion, euthanasia, vegetarianism, critical race theory, which teaches that white people are oppressors and that non-whites are the oppressed, which is exactly the opposite, but similar to what they did in Nazi Germany with the Nuremberg laws. They taught in the public schools. They taught in the public schools that Jews were the oppressors and that Germans were the oppressed. And that was taught in the public schools, just like they're doing right now in California public schools, but they don't call it critical race theory. They'll give it another name and accuse you of disinformation because you use the word critical race theory, but it has the same effect. They're teaching that white people, especially white males, are oppressors and that everyone else is oppressed, which is a form of cultural Marxism. Before it was that rich people are the oppressors and poor people are the oppressed. And it's always about divide and conquer with the far left. And so I'm going to get into a little bit about the reality of what really is going on and some true history, because what you're learning in the schools is complete nonsense. It's just like when they teach you that America is a democracy, even though all of our founding fathers specifically spoke out against democracy as inherently evil. Benjamin Franklin referenced democracy like this. Democracy is when two wolves and a sheep show up for lunch and decide what's on the menu. And a republic is when a well-armed sheep shows up and contests the vote. And all of our founding fathers, without exception, spoke out against democracy is something that's inherently self-destructive. They didn't like it. That's why we have a constitutional republic that was designed to uphold the rights of the individual. And the left hates that because majority rules is the philosophy of the left. It's if you get 51% of the vote, then they can vote to take away the property rights and everything else of the majority. I'm sorry, of the minority, because after all, the minority, they're just white, evil, rich people, and they didn't earn anything. They need to be stripped of their wealth. And that really came full circle with Obama and his campus culture. And he started flooding our administrative agencies with people that have that mindset. And we saw that with Peter Strzok and Lisa Page. And of course, they got, even though they broke the Constitution and broke a lot of laws, got phony, false FISA warrants, they ended up getting jobs, I guess, at CNN. So, they all go to Communist News Network after they destroy people's lives and they get jobs. So what's the matter, you? It's really good to see you. Mama Lion, Jody Shiloh, and Evan Peter, right on, brother. So tonight we're gonna teach you real history that's not burdened by Marxism, because the national education system and the California Teachers Union, they're all just a bunch of far left crazies, and they do not want you to know the truth. So tonight we're going to learn what the truth is, and we're going to start off with just some irony, right? Some irony that so many of my Jewish friends, and I have a lot of Jewish friends, by the way, Jews gave me my first shot in the legal business. I got my first jobs from Jews, and they helped me become a lawyer. And I never saw any issues with them trying to take over the world, or the whole Goy thing, treating Goy people bad or whatever. I was always treated with utmost respect by them. And they appreciated me and respected me because I was a Marine, and they kind of looked up to me. And I worked for them for free until I learned the law. And then they paid me so well that I was making like 15 grand a month while I was studying law, from sleeping on park benches to making real money while I'm still studying law, making more than a lot of lawyers did at the time. So I just got to tell you guys, that's complete nonsense. And then, of course, there's all the other stuff too. Like, Trump made it possible for Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel. And he also he has Jewish family members, but they're conservative Jews, right? And then, of course, we do know that 51% of Jews are atheists, and those are typically the ones who vote Democrat. So those are different types of Jews. And my friends who are conservative Jews call them Edomites. They say they're not even real Jews. That those are people who don't even abide by the Torah. So they're not, to my Jewish friends who are conservatives, who, go to church. I guess they don't call it church, but anyways, they go to worship service and stuff like that. They do the Torah thing where they have the thing on their head and all the things wrapped around their arms. And I don't know what all that stuff is. But anyways, so I just want to lay that foundation that I don't support Nazis, that I was a U.S. Marine, and I love America, and I love the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, because immediately I'm going to get branded as a Nazi for daring to go against the false religion of liberalism, which teaches the faith-based religion that Trump is a Nazi, for example, and that Hitler, in fact, was right-wing, which we're going to learn tonight it couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, all of the sources that the left uses to proclaim Hitler as being right-wing come from far-left Marxist sources. And so we're going to get into that as well. But you guys are going to have so much fun tonight. And Evan Peter, thank you so much for joining my show. And by the way, guys, I cut off work early tonight because I was so incensed by this report that I saw, because I'm tired of the leftist press just letting things float out there and only so-called fact-checking things when it goes against their political narrative. But when the other side is being attacked and destroyed by these far-left news reporters, they never do anything to try and correct their statements. If they do, they'll do it for like 2 seconds at midnight on a Sunday and then bury it somewhere. So the public will still think that Trump is a Russian agent, for example, even though we know now that was a complete lie. That was a Hillary Clinton that spread that. And she tried to get the CIA to come on board with her, and they wouldn't. So she was able to get help from Obama holdovers like Peter Strzok and Lisa Page to get these BS FISA warrants and get these illegal warrants issued against Carter Page, or Carter, I forgot his name, but Carter, whatever his name is. And anyways, it's going to go on, but I don't want to get too far into it, guys, because I started my show late tonight, and you people back east are going to miss out on the best part. So first, I'm going to show you the new Democrats. This is the new Democrats that you find on all of our college campuses. And I'm going to show you who they're funded by, which is George Soros. Now, George Soros is an interesting character because he funds Democrats, but he was a Hungarian Jew. And we know he admitted on live television that he helped the Nazis round up Jews. And where did those Jews go? Into concentration camps. But he says because he was young and it was his life or theirs, that he had no choice but to rat out all of his Jewish neighbors and get them thrown basically in concentration camps. Of course, Google and all of his friends in the Marxist media, in the Marxist social media, try to bury that, but you can find it if you look hard enough, the news reports. And basically, during World War II, all those Nazis who said, I had no choice, I was only following orders, yeah? Well, he made that same argument. And the Nuremberg courts hung all those Nazis for saying that. In other words, you can't go around and round up your fellow Jews and throw them in the ovens, which is essentially what you're doing when you're helping the Nazi SS in Hungary, and then claim later you had no choice. The Nazis tried to claim that, and they all got hung, right? Except for the ones that our government brought over here to help with NASA, which kind of sounds like Nazi if you put a Z and an I on it. But the bottom line is that Soros gets a pass. And why is that? Because he gives tons of money to the Democrat Party. And then you look at the people who Hillary Clinton worshiped. Margaret Sanger, I mean, basically a Nazi who got support from the Ku Klux Klan. And Margaret Sanger supported abortion because she wanted to euthanize and kill off black people. She hated black people and thought abortion would be a great way to get rid of them. That's one of Hillary Clinton's superheroes. But you don't hear any of this stuff on the news media. And again, I'm not a partisan, guys. I'm a libertarian. I hate both parties equally. I believe that we should have 50 or 60 parties because that way we would have less laws being passed. And we should be electing people who want to delete laws, not pass more laws. But what we're seeing now, especially among my Jewish friends who are now no longer Democrats, by the way, they finally figured it out that they're supporting a party that wants to destroy them. And you're going to see why in a second. Now we have the modern Democrat Party wearing Palestinian garb, supporting Muslims, gays for Palestine, right? Even though we know in Gaza, those same people would be thrown off roofs for being gay. It's almost like these people are suffering from a mental illness, right? But what I figured out is that no, liberalism and modern day progressivism is a faith-based religion, because you have to have faith to think that somebody who's like a Wahhabist isn't going to throw you off a roof if you call yourself a trans or a gay for Palestine, right? You really have to be cuckoo. So we're going to get into it. And again, this isn't like one of my normal shows, but I am a lawyer and I'm also a legal historian. So you have to understand that I'm going to teach you the truth, whether you like it or not. So we're going to start off with the modern Democrat and why so many Jews, even personal injury attorney friends of mine, are no longer Democrats. And we're going to find out why. We're going to start off watching this video, and then I'm going to get into some scholarly stuff to show you that Hitler actually was a member of the Communist Party. And he definitely was far from being right wing. And we're going to get into that right now. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and check out George Soros. And I'm going to go ahead and turn off the music because there's no narration going on here. But billionaire George Soros basically purportedly is funding these college groups. Let me see if we got
the Bank of England.
I just hate that music.
As the Modi government and Prime Minister Modi in particular, an enemy. Billionaire George Soros, who is infamous for interfering in domestic affairs of various countries, is now being criticized for funding massive anti-Israel protests in campuses across the US.
All over the US.
Some say this has led to a rise in anti-Semitic incidents across the country.
Some say.
A recently published New York Post report claims George Soros is funding anti-Israel protests across top US university campuses.
Yeah, he absolutely is. And so one of my friends says that he thinks that George Soros is a self-hating Jew, right? And that he hates himself so much for basically selling out all of his neighbors to the Nazi SS when they were rounding up his fellow Hungarian Jews, and he helped them do that he's like self-hating. And so he just has continued to do that as an adult. So this is what prompted me to want to do this story tonight, because we don't have a lot of time, but I want to just kind of get into the story. This probably won't be one of my most popular shows. I'll probably lose a lot of followers because you're so brainwashed by the Marxist public school system to believe that Hitler is right-wing and that Trump is a Nazi, your brain is going to explode. But let's just get into it.
MSNBC is facing intense criticism for its coverage of Donald Trump's rally at Madison Square Garden. The network controversially aired footage from a Nazi rally in the same venue back in 1939. The anchor noted that Trump's rally took place in that same place, calling it particularly chilling. This comparison sparked outrage online, with critics accusing MSNBC of incitement. Conservative voices on social media defended the rally's diversity, with one user stating, "Yesterday's Trump rally was filled with Americans from every walk of life." Among those attending was a Holocaust survivor, Jerry Wartsky, who had endorsed Trump just last week, calling him a mensch and rejecting Vice President Kamala Harris's recent claim that Trump is a fascist. Even Elon Musk, who spoke at the rally, lashed out at MSNBC, labeling them the scum of the earth. The backlash points to a larger sentiment that despite Democrats calling for positivity and unity, MSNBC's portrayal of Trump's supporters as akin to Nazis is perceived as divisive. Republican commentator Colin Rugg echoed these sentiments, saying, "You don't hate the media enough?" while also mentioning Wartsky's presence at the rally. In the end, this MSNBC segment has only viewed accusations of media bias, with Trump supporters arguing that the liberal media's portrayal crossed the line. For more stories like these, be sure to subscribe.
It's not even the liberal media anymore. It's the Marxist media. I mean, these guys are out of their freaking minds, the way that they talk and the way they're trying to brainwash our kids. You need to homeschool your kids unless you want them to come out completely brainwashed and anti-American, hating their country. Basically, unless you want your kids to be little miniature George Soroses, get your kids out of public school. Now, let's check this one out. So as you guys know, I am from California, and I used to study at the library at UCLA all the time. And I have a couple of friends. Well, I have a lot of friends who are Jewish, but these are basically Jews who are non-political, who go to UCLA. One guy had his Star of David ripped off him by these they call themselves like Hamas protesters. They're pro-Hamas, pro-Gazans, or whatever you want to call it. So let's just take a look at what they're doing. So they all self-identify as Democrats. All these people wearing this terrorist Muslim gear, they all self-identify as Democrats. And here we go.
Can I please go to class?
We're going this way. You guys have closed the entrance. We are UCLA students. I have my ID right here. I'm being blocked off, not by the security guard, but by you two. You three. Oh, look, they're making their burger while I'm going this way. Excuse me. This is what they do. Everybody, look at this. Look at this.
It's like Nazi Germany.
I deserve to go here. We pay tuition. This is our school. And they're not letting me walk in. My class is over there. I want to use that entrance. Well, I can't take it. Will you let me go in? This can be over in a second. Just let me and my friends go in to class.
We're not engaging.
Then you can move. Will you?
And again, they're discriminating against him because he has a Star of David or the Signet of Solomon, whatever you want to call it, but because he identifies as being Jewish. And clearly these Democrats, because they're completely brainwashed by their leftist Marxist college professors, that they're going along with the program. Keep watching.
You move.
We're not engaging.
Okay, we're going. We're going. I'm going in.
Okay, false imprisonment.
I have my hands
battery.
up. I'm not hurting them. I'm not hurting them. That's what they do. That's what they do, everybody. You guys are promoting aggression. You guys are promoting hate.
That's right.
We're UCLA students. We deserve to be there.
That's right.
Let's go.
So did you guys get a load of that? I mean, unfreaking believable. Did you guys see that? Hold on a minute. So I don't know if you guys remember, like Kristallnacht, when the German SA, the Sturmabteilung, the brown shirts, they were like the enforcement arm of the Nazi party. A lot of people don't know that many of them were actually communists initially, just like Hitler was a communist, which we're going to get into in a minute. And they were basically preventing Jewish shopkeepers from getting into their shops. Ultimately, the Nuremberg laws made it impossible for Jews to go to the public schools. Initially, before they stopped letting them go to schools, though, they had their own version of critical race theory, where all the school kids were taught that if you're Jewish, they're oppressors, and that all of the other people, the Germans, were oppressed. The same thing they're doing right now, but the reverse, especially in California, where they the teachers and the teachers unions are teaching, well, if you're white, you're an oppressor, and everyone else is oppressed, right? And they're saying that's history. We need to teach real history, and you're denying these kids the right to know history unless you teach hatred against white people. That's basically, in a nutshell, what they're doing. And that's called critical race theory, but they have other words for it like intersectionalism. And in fact, in California, they even started their own version of what they call what I would call a racial purity board, because they want to do the reparations thing where black people are going to get $5 million a piece because 300 years ago, one of their ancestors was a slave, right? So, or 600 years ago, however long ago it was, even though California never even had slaves, but obviously they need to buy votes. So they're going to do that with your money. And so the thing that's really interesting about that is, well, how are you going to prove that they're really black, right? Well, you have to have a racial purity board to prove genetically that they earned the right to get that $5 million, just like Hitler had his own racial purity board to determine whether or not you were a true Aryan under the Nuremberg laws, right? Because if you weren't pure Aryan, you couldn't be a German citizen, you couldn't have voting rights, you couldn't go to a public school, you couldn't own a firearm. You guys following me so far? Are you guys seeing the similarities between the modern Democrat Party and what happened in Nazi Germany? I just want you to see the parallels. It's uncanny if you're not totally brainwashed by the public school system and leftist college professors. But now what we're going to do is we're going to get into this is a 30-minute video. I'm going to try not to interrupt as much as possible, but this is a British bloke, and I've been following him a lot, and I'm going to share his link in the menu here in a second. But what I'm going to do is let you guys watch for yourself and let you understand when Hitler joined the Communist Party and when he started hating Jews, because he didn't just hate Jews automatically. Remember, he actually supported Jews because guys like Karl Marx started communism. But ultimately, what Hitler got upset about is he didn't want international communism. He wanted a nationalist form of communism. And that was why he called himself the National Socialist Party. But in order for him to get the support that he needed, he had to support the military class and he had to support big business. So people say, well, that means that he's a capitalist. Hardly, because when he got into power, he placed Nazi officials at all of those businesses and forced all those businesses to Nazify. And then they'll say, well, but he sold stocks. Well, yeah, the German government that basically controlled all of these businesses, and you had to be a Nazi party official if you wanted to continue running your business. So that's socialism, control the means of production. The state controls the means of production. But socialist and communist college professors, their heads will explode when you try to confront them with this truth and this reality. It's just too much truth for them. And that's the reason why they want to censor your speech and silence you, because they do not want people to have a different opinion other than what the World Economic Forum has, what guys like George Soros has. And now you're going to watch this video with me, and we're going to understand a little bit more as to why that is.
This is a picture of the funeral procession for Jewish socialist revolutionary Kurt Eisner, who had been a member of Karl Marx's party, the Social Democratic Party of Germany, the SPD. And yes, that is Hitler. There's also video footage of this event where Hitler is visible, although I can't show it here for copyright reasons, and there's contemporary evidence explaining why Hitler was elected into Kurt Eisner's Bavarian People's State, and then after Eisner's Socialist Republic collapsed, he was elected again into a Bavarian Soviet Republic, which was communist, and why, despite being a raging anti-Semite not long after, Hitler was attending the funeral of a Jewish socialist revolutionary who was the leader of that Bavarian Socialist Republic. Also, one of Hitler's chauffeurs, Julius Schreck, founder of the SS, and seen here with Adolf, fought in the Bavarian Red Army. And Freikorps Epp fought against this Soviet Republic with members including Ernst Röhm, Hans Frank, Rudolf Hess, and both of the Strassers, who were supposedly the left-wing element of the Nazi Party but were fighting against the communists in 1919, whereas Hitler and his chauffeur were fighting for them. There's a lot to unpack here, so let's get on with it.
So far, it's all true. I've verified all this. I've seen the video too.
Let's start with the facts. On the 7th of November 1918, before the Social Democrats seized power all over Germany, Kurt Eisner, a Jewish revolutionary, quit Karl Marx's Social Democratic Party because he thought it wasn't revolutionary enough and conducted a putsch in Munich. As leader of the Bavarian Independent Social Democrats, he founded a far-left Bavarian Socialist Republic, also known as the People's State of Bavaria.
So just understand this, right? Eisner was Hitler's friend, and Hitler was a member of this Communist Party, this element. And Eisner was also a friend of Karl Marx. But Eisner had his own form of communism that ultimately other communists didn't like. So just understand that. Hitler was a member of the German Communist Party. Fact. Indisputable. You will never, ever hear a Marxist college professor or a public school teacher ever talk about this. Why? Because they're so enamored in the false religion of liberalism that their head will explode if they're forced to admit this, because their solution to everything is to say, well, that wasn't really real communism, right? They always say that wasn't real communism. If we can just try it again, even though hundreds of millions of people have been massacred under fake communism, let's try it again. Maybe this time we can get it right. That's always what they do. Let's keep going.
Eisner wanted independence from the Weimar Republic and attempted to reform the capitalist system into a socialist one, although he promised that they would not do what Lenin had done in Russia. Well, a soldier called Adolf Hitler was elected into the Soldiers' Soviet Council and became the deputy battalion representative.
And so it's so funny to look at some of the goofy comments, right? Oh, so wait, he liked Jews, but he killed them. You guys still aren't getting it. Watch the video and understand why he came to start hating Jews. Because initially, again, Hitler had no problem with Jews. He was friends with Jews initially. And ultimately, he became disenfranchised with Jews because he did not support what he called Jewish Bolshevism in Karl Marx. He didn't support that type of communism. So he called that Jewish Bolshevism. And so what he wanted to do is form his own form of communism called German communism. And that's why he became nationalist. He wanted to have German communism under the guise of nationalism. And of course, you'll always hear the lefties say, oh, nationalism means that you're a right-wing Nazi. But actually, no, nationalism was just a form of German communism and German socialism. Let's keep watching.
He was elected by his fellow soldiers, who also overwhelmingly voted for the Social Democrats in January 1919, meaning that they thought that Hitler best represented their socialist views.
You're going to love this show, bro.
But this Bavarian socialist regime was unpopular in the countryside and lost support after the election of January 1919. I mean, it's no wonder, since just like every other socialist regime, they failed to maintain food supplies, or provide jobs, or keep the transportation system functioning. Workers began to heckle Eisner and shout,
"Sounds like modern Democrats, right? Here, let's give billions of dollars for a train that's 3 hours away from any population center, for a high-speed train in California that'll be built in a couple of years. What, 10 years later, it's still not built, but billions of dollars for all of his high party officials they got money, right? Or let's spend billions of dollars for charging stations for electric cars, right? And claim a victory when we only got 3 of them built. Typical, right? Sounds just like modern Democrats. Let's keep going."
him down at meetings. In cabinet, Eisner was angrily told by one of its members, "You are an anarchist. You are no statesman. You are a fool. We are being ruined by bad management." So, an aristocratic student and former officer, Graf Anton von Arco-Valley, assassinated Kurt Eisner on the 21st of February 1919, ironically as Eisner was on his way to resign. There is film footage and a still photograph showing him, Hitler, marching in the funeral procession of the Bavarian independent leader Kurt Eisner, wearing a black mourning armband and another red one in support of the socialist government. Here again is the still photo, and I can't show the footage of Eisner's funeral because I don't want my video to get copyright striked by YouTube, but
I've seen the video. You can see it online.
You can find it if you're determined, and Hitler is in it.
Yep.
Hoffman's photograph is grainy, but both he and his son have confirmed that the photo depicts Hitler. In fact, an arrow had been affixed to the photo's negative that points directly to Hitler, either by Hoffman, his son, or his grandson. In the early 1980s, Hoffman's son publicly confirmed that the man in the photo was indeed Hitler. While Hitler could easily have joined, for instance, the Thule Society, which had inspired Eisner's assassination and which was full of future National Socialist leaders such as Alfred Rosenberg, Rudolf Hess, or Hans Frank, Hitler chose publicly to show his support for Eisner. Sepp Dietrich, later a general in the Waffen-SS and head of Hitler's SS Liebstandarte, was elected chairman of a soldiers' council in November 1918. So yes, Hitler and Dietrich were elected into a revolutionary socialist government in 1919,
Socialists.
and Hitler took part in the funeral procession of Kurt Eisner, who was Jewish, which is why he may not have wanted to admit that later in Mein Kampf.
That's right.
Towards the end of November 1918, I returned to Munich. I went to the depot of my regiment, which was now in the hands of the soldiers' councils. As the whole administration was quite repulsive to me, I decided to leave it as soon as I possibly could. He said he left Munich and then... The situation there could not last as it was. It tended irresistibly to a further extension of the revolution. Eisner's death served only to hasten this development and finally led to the...
Everybody give me a bunch of ones for Brett Ray for supporting my channel, buying a bunch of memberships. By the way, guys, I really loved showing BZ Watchdog's video last night, but I got a strike because he said too many swear words, so I got demonetized. So please, guys, if you want me to share your videos, which I love to do, please get rid of all the cuss words and any copyrighted music. I cannot do it anymore until I have a chance to review them first. So anyways, I saved that video, that 3-hour masterpiece that I did last night for a members only video. So at least my paid members can watch that video. As much as I love you guys, no more sharing of videos until I know that they're clean, because you guys are going to make it impossible for me to get the good news out if these people that run YouTube continually strike me and eventually demonetize, because you never know when the thought police are going to take down this channel. And my friends are going to actually be the downfall of this channel if we keep on doing that. So anyways, I'm going to rewind this a little bit because I want you to understand that Sepp Dietrich, right? I mean, Sepp Dietrich was a police officer. He was a blue collar guy. And I think he ended up becoming the head of the Leibstandarte, which was the number one, it's called bodyguard. It was Hitler's bodyguard unit. And look, I'm a big time history fanatic, especially when it comes to World War II. So if you want to know about World War II, I'm the guy that you want to talk to if it has anything to do with Germany, the SS Handschar, which Handschar, and the Grand Mufti of Palestine, and the connection between the Nazis and the Muslims, exactly the same connection that we have now with the modern Democrat Party. But let's keep going and watch the video.
Jewish, which is why he may not have wanted to admit that later in Mein Kampf. Towards the end of November 1918, I returned to Munich. I went to the depot of my regiment, which was now in the hands of the soldiers' councils. As the whole administration was quite repulsive to me, I decided to leave it as soon as I possibly could. He said he left Munich and then... The situation there could not last as it was. It tended irresistibly to a further extension of the revolution. Eisner's death served only to hasten this development and finally led to the dictatorship of the councils, or, to put it more correctly, to a Jewish hegemony, which turned out to be transitory, but which was the original aim of those who had contrived the revolution. Hitler claims he was having doubts whether he could shape events at this time, and then says... A few days after the liberation of Munich, I was ordered to appear before the Inquiry Commission, which had been set up in the 2nd Infantry Regiment for the purpose of watching revolutionary activities. This was my first incursion to the more or less political field.
So are you guys getting this so far? Hitler wanted a communist system, but he was angry that the few Jews that were involved in this Jewish communist organization that he was involved in, he felt that they were trying to take it over and make it into like a good old boys club of Jewish people. And that pissed him off. That's what started this. But he still believed in communism. That's what you need to understand. So it's always fun when I talk to leftists, because they're religious zealots, basically. And I ask them, why did he call it the National Socialist Party then if he didn't support socialism? And they'll say, oh, that's just nonsense. You don't know what you're talking about. You're crazy. He was right wing. You don't know what you're talking about. They never have an answer for it. Give me a bunch of ones if you think that that's crazy. Why wouldn't he call it like the National Right Wing Party? And then they'll say, but he was a fascist. Well, no, he supported some concepts of Mussolini's fascism. But no, he was a communist nationalist. That's what Hitler really was. He was a communist nationalist. Let's keep watching and you're gonna learn even more.
Almost all of this is a lie. He had been involved with the Bavarian Socialists and was a political representative in their Soviet, so he was already in politics before March 1919, and rather than leaving Munich and not getting involved in the supposed Jewish revolution, Hitler took part in it. The communists had referred to Kurt Eisner's Bavarian People's State as a pseudo-council's republic, Scheinräte Republic, probably because it didn't bow to Moscow like they did.
Exactly.
Well, after Kurt
You understand that. So the Russian communism, there was a battle between Russian communism and German communism. The Russian communists, remember, they were taken over by the Bolsheviks or the workers, and they were radical, and they basically killed everybody. And Hitler didn't like that type of communism. And ultimately, he called that Jewish communism or Jewish Bolshevism. But he still supported German communism. Just keep listening. You guys are going to learn a lot. And then I'm going to help narrate where I know some history as well. Hopefully, Tony's out there listening. Tony Castelli, share this with all your Jewish friends who are on the fence about what's really going on with the Democrat Party, because what they're doing is more aligned with basically Russian-style communism. And remember, Stalin hated Jews, and so did Karl Marx, even though he was Jewish himself. He was an atheist Jew. Let's keep going.
Eisner's death, the communists held their own revolution and created what they called a real Council's Republic, Räte Republic. Yes, real socialism. Today, Bavaria has finally elected the dictatorship of the proletariat. This real socialist dictatorship under the command of Max Levin attempted to create a Soviet-style system in Bavaria with links to Moscow. Hitler was elected again into this government as a representative for his battalion, so Hitler became a member of the communist Soviet government that had links to Moscow. And yes, this was real communism or socialism or whatever you want to call it. On 14th of April 1919, the day after the Communist Räte Republic, Soviet Republic, had been proclaimed, the Munich Soldiers' Councils approved fresh elections of all barracks representatives to ensure that the Munich garrison stood loyally behind the new regime. In the elections the following day, Hitler was chosen as deputy battalion representative. Not only then did Hitler do nothing to assist in the crushing of Munich's Red Republic, he was an elected representative of his battalion during the whole period of its existence. Hitler not only supported Germany's communist regime during this brief time period, but also bestowed his blessings to a government that had pledged allegiance to Lenin's Soviet Russia in Moscow. Worse, having described this communist republic as a Jewish hegemony, Hitler effectively admitted that he had supported and was a part of a government that was wanting Jewish hegemony at this time, so it's no wonder he wanted to distance himself from this. Well, the revolutionary socialist government in Berlin, headed by Friedrich Ebert, leader of Karl Marx's Social Democratic Party, wasn't happy that Bavarian Bolshevik communists had declared independence from the rest of Germany, so he sent in his own revolutionary forces to put them down. The government troops and the Freikorps, both of which were fighting for the revolutionary Berlin government, have since been deemed to be counter-revolutionaries because they fought against the Spartacists and other communists. However, this is a blatant misinterpretation of history. The Bolsheviks in Russia weren't counter-revolutionaries just because they fought against the Mensheviks. Stalin wasn't a counter-revolutionary because he fought against Trotsky. The Soviets and Chinese communists weren't counter-revolutionaries because they got embroiled in border wars with each other, and similarly, the Freikorps weren't counter-revolutionary because they fought for a revolutionary socialist government headed by the same party Karl Marx had been a part of against another lot of revolutionaries. Yet somehow, historians have fallen under the sway of Marxist propaganda and continue to spout this myth that the Freikorps were counter-revolutionary and far-right, whatever that means. And if the argument were true that the vision of all Freikorps and of all its members stood completely opposed to democracy, it was instead a fascist ethos that they espoused and practiced, we are left with no answers as to why DDP members such as Fridolin Solider and even some Jewish veterans had fought in the Freikorps. Even the Freikorps Oberland, sections of which were later to form the nucleus of the SA, included not only Heinrich Himmler and Arthur Rodel, who, as we shall see, was
We'll
to become
see,
a
won't we?
concentration camp
We'll
commander,
find out what's the matter
but
here.
also several
history.
Jewish members. Even Himmler's politicalization towards fascism, Nazism, was only to take place in 1922. There was thus no direct line from service in the Freikorps to a politicalization towards radical right-wing fascism, Nazism. There's a difference between fascism and Nazism which many
go, listen.
historians refuse to recognize, which is why I'm correcting the quote. Anyway, the revolutionary Freikorps and revolutionary government troops destroyed the revolutionary Bavarian Soviet Republic in little over 2 weeks. The Freikorps were defending the revolution against a second revolution,
That's right.
and so weren't counter-revolutionary at all. Their destruction of the Bavarian communists was made easier by the fact that this second Soviet regime was equally as unpopular as the first. Why? Because the communists decided not to help the poor at all in their time of need, despite claiming in their ideology that that was what they existed for. As food shortages heightened, especially of milk, the people demanded that the Soviets feed them, and their response was, "What does it matter? Most of it goes to the children of the bourgeoisie anyway. We are not
Exactly.
interested in keeping them alive.
Sounds like
No
the
harm if
Soviets.
they die. They'd only grow into enemies of the proletariat." A lot of the Bavarian socialist leaders were Jewish, adding to the idea that the Marxists were a bunch of Jews. But one soldier in the Bavarian Red Army who wasn't Jewish was Julius Schreck, who would
Who was
later
he?
go on to be Hitler's chauffeur until
Ah,
he died of natural causes in 1936. Schreck would, in March 1925, found the Schutzstaffel, or SS for short.
so
So the guy who found
the guy who was Hitler's chauffeur founded the Schutzstaffel, Hitler's private bodyguard, and he was a communist along with Hitler. None of this stuff is taught in the Marxist-run public school system. And why do you think that is, guys? Let's keep watching.
founded the Nazi SS and later became Hitler's chauffeur, was a communist in 1919 and fought for the Red Army. Hermann Esser, one of Hitler's earliest supporters, who became the first propaganda chief of the NSDAP, had been for a while a journalist on a social democratic newspaper. Gottfried Feder, whose views on interest slavery so gripped Hitler's imagination in summer 1919, had sent a statement of his position to the socialist government headed by Kurt Eisner the previous November. Just to point out, Gottfried Feder was one of the founders of the German Workers' Party that would later become the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or NSDAP, the Nazi Party. It's also interesting that many socialists will say that the Nazi Party did attract socialists to its ranks.
There's that pesky word again, socialist, right? I mean, why, if Hitler was right wing, why didn't he call it the National Right Wing Party? Why did he call it the National Socialist Party? Was that by mistake? Or maybe these college professors and lefties, historical revisionists, maybe they're wrong. I don't know. Let's keep watching, and let's use critical thinking instead of the false religion of progressivism to guide our thoughts.
Ranks in the early days, but it was all a trick, and Hitler had them bumped off, proving that he wasn't a socialist. They talk about Ernst Röhm getting assassinated
Later, let's
in the
go
Night of the
TV.
Long Knives, and also that Hitler killed Gregor Strasser and exiled his brother Otto Strasser, all of whom supposedly represented the left-wing socialist element of the National Socialist Party. There's a million counter-arguments against this, but on the topic of this video, it's interesting that neither Ernst Röhm nor the Strassers participated in the Communist Bavarian Socialist Republic.
So just take a look really quick. I want you to let this soak in, okay? Röhm, who was the leader of the SA, the Sturmabteilung, the brown shirts, Hess or Huss, Strasse, Frank, and Epp, alles war Bavarian Soviets. And Hitler and Schreck were also part of, I'm sorry, these guys fought against the Bavarian socialists, and Hitler and Schreck were actually part of and members of and leaders of the Bavarian socialists. So just think, let that sink in for a minute, because you'll never hear this on any college campus, that this is like verboten, yeah? You'll be put in the ovens if you even talk about this. And that's the problem that I have with the modern left, is they want to silence people who disagree with their historical revisionism or their political interpretation. They want to silence you and accuse you of hate speech. And so our founding fathers were aware of people like that. And that's why we have a First Amendment, to prevent exactly what's going on right now in our college campuses and in the universities, in our government-run news media like Communist News Network, CNN or PMSNBC. They want to control the narrative. And guys like Soros and Hillary are so pissed that Elon Musk came along and took over Twitter and made it into X, because now there's a platform where real stuff can get out there. And these other social media platforms are having to loosen their belts a little bit because they're losing so much audience and traffic to X. Because the problem with freedom is it's like an infectious disease. Once people have freedom, they want more of it. And they'll never go back to not being free again unless you can get the minds of the children. So just think, if you could force adults, the older people who think like me, to put something in their body, for example, that might take them out, and then you put all the kids in a public school system where they're being brainwashed and confused about their sexuality, they're being told to rat their parents out, then maybe they'll believe that we need to restrict speech and that everything is hate speech because they're young and impressionable. That couldn't possibly happen here, could it? That could never happen here, could it, guys? Of course not. Because if I said something like that, I might get banned, right? I might lose my channel if I actually told you what I really think. But let's keep going.
Think that they, as the left-wing socialist element, would support the communists. But not only did they not, they actually fought against it. Both Strasser and Ernst Röhm were members of Freikorps Epp, along with Hans Frank and Rudolf Hess. Hans Frank would be the guy who took charge of Poland and oversaw the extermination camps. Rudolf Hess would obviously go on to be the deputy Führer, second only to Hitler, until he decided to fly to Scotland because he really liked Iron Brewer. And Epp would later be appointed by Hitler to Reichsgovernor of Bavaria in 1933. So all of these supposedly left-wing elements of the Nazi party fought in the supposed far-right counter-revolutionary movement against the communists in Bavaria, which Schreck and Hitler were in.
They fought against Hitler.
Who was the left-wing element of the party again? More likely, two revolutionary left-wing entities were vying for power against each other, and all of these future members of the National Socialist Party were caught up fighting for what they perceived to be real socialism.
That's right.
But obviously Hitler later wanted to downplay his role.
So it's sort of like the modern Democrat Party, where you have the anti-Jewish element led by the girl with the buck teeth and Ilhan Omar. They're like the anti-Jewish Democrats, and then the old Democrats. So basically, you could compare what's happening here with Hitler over here in the red, being a member of the Bavarian Soviets, and then these other communists over here, the National Socialist Germans, who were fighting against Hitler and Schreck because they wanted their own type of socialism or communism. But they both support communism. It's just that they were fighting against each other because each other thought that their version of communism was better. So it would be no different than like Bernie Sanders forming an alliance with a conservative Democrat, which I don't think there are any anymore, but I think there was one conservative Democrat a couple of years ago. I think it was in Virginia or something, but you get it, right? So it would be the same thing. It would be like Kennedy forming an alliance with Johnson. Johnson was like the Ku Klux Klan Democrat, and Kennedy was the Northeastern liberal, more pro-black and pro-civil rights Democrat. It's basically the same thing if you were going to compare the two. So they're both basically Democrats, right? But one's a conservative and one's more liberal, but they both support the Democrat ideals. And that's what we had happening here with Röhm, Hess, Strasser, Frank, and Epp. And then you have Hitler and Schreck, who was Hitler's limousine driver and the founder of the Nazi SS, ardent communists. Okay, so let's keep going. I hope you guys are getting a good education. Give me a bunch of ones if you think you're having a good time so far. And again, anybody who wants to throw me a super chat for this show, I certainly would appreciate it. I wasn't even going to go live tonight. But after seeing that video about people calling Trump a Nazi because he held a rally in New York, and I was thinking to myself, wait a minute, these people accusing Trump of being a Nazi are more closely aligned to communism with their anti-Jewish philosophies and rhetoric than Trump is. So let's do a show about it, and I'll show you what I mean.
Socialist and Communist Soviets of Bavaria, and the reason was because he had to do his best later to separate his National Socialist ideology from Marxist socialist ideology, since there were so many similarities between the two. In fact, it's my opinion that that was the reason Mein Kampf was written, to make a distinction between his socialism versus their socialism. That's why there are passages in Mein Kampf where he's defending himself from the accusation that they were one and the same.
They're not.
The racial Weltanschauung, the Nazi worldview, is fundamentally distinguished from the Marxist by reason of the fact that the former recognizes the significance of race and therefore also personal worth, and has made these the pillars of its structure. These are the most important factors of its Weltanschauung worldview. If the National Socialist movement should fail to understand the fundamental importance of this essential principle, if it should merely varnish the external appearance of the present state and adopt the majority principle, it would really do nothing more than compete with Marxism on its own ground. For that reason, it would not have the right to call itself a Weltanschauung worldview. If the social program of the movement consisted in eliminating personality and putting the multitude in its place, then National Socialism would be corrupted with the poison of Marxism, just like our national bourgeois parties are. Translation: the only difference between National Socialism and Marxism is that National Socialism believes in racial classes rather than economic classes. And that if the Nazis forget this, and if they stood by the principle of mob rule, then they would be Marxists. And yes, I'm paraphrasing slightly and bringing in other elements he wrote elsewhere.
So get a load of that, guys. So Hitler just didn't like Marxism because he considered that to be Jewish Bolshevism, right? So, but he liked communism, and in fact, he was a Communist Party leader. And his limousine driver, Schreck, the founder of the Nazi SS, was also an ardent communist. What they didn't like is the Russian form of communism called Bolshevism or Marxism, which is basically what many of our college professors in America are today. Basically, they're like Marxists, right? But what Hitler said is, in 1919, is that if the National Socialist movement should fail to understand the fundamental importance of this essential principle, if it should merely varnish the external appearance of the present state and adopt the majority principle, it would really do nothing more than compete with Marxism on its own ground. So he was upset that his form of communism was being forced to compete with the Russian form of communism. That's what he didn't like. So let's keep going. Hopefully you guys are starting to understand a little bit more about the battle between the German communism and Russian communism.
In Mein Kampf, but that's exactly what he wrote. Now, he wouldn't have written this if others weren't accusing him of being a Marxist by another name. So he was writing this to not only defend himself, but also distinguish his socialism against their socialism. When Hitler says in Mein Kampf that he wasn't part of the Social Democratic Party, and doesn't mention his involvement in the Bavarian Soviets, and doesn't mention his attendance at Kurt Eisner's funeral, we know why. Because he was trying to distance himself, as well as his National Socialism, from the Marxists. And the Marxists are equally happy to accept this because they want to distance themselves from National Socialism. Because they're all very similar socialist movements. But don't worry, communists, because historians are eager to come to your rescue.
That's right.
In his book, Hitler's First War, historian Thomas Weber explains that Hitler didn't like Munich and only returned to it because his regiment was to be demobilized there. Plus, the fact that he had no friends or family or a job or a life, yep, definitely sounds like a communist, meant that he ended up staying in Munich because that's where his social network was. Or he was a socialist. But no, because Weber refuses to accept this.
That's right.
If he really was a socialist after the war, how do we make sense of his anti-socialist expressions during the war, for which contemporary sources exist at least for 1915? How do we make sense of his closeness to and adoration of officers among the regimental staff who clearly were not socialists? So, to answer the second part, let me ask the same question from the opposite side. If he really was a far-right counter-revolutionary who hated Jews at this time, how come he was friendly with his fellow soldiers in the regiment, some of whom were Jews and most of whom were socialists, who then went on to elect him twice into the Soviets? Clearly, it doesn't matter which side of the spectrum he's on, because he'll have to put up with people.
I mean, aren't you guys kind of blown away that colleges just overlooked the fact that Hitler was actually an elected representative of the Soviets in Germany? I mean, that should tell you a lot. I mean, you know who your enemies are by in the press or even in the school system by what they don't teach you, by what they hide from you. So selective education is no education at all. And that's why me, being a classical liberal, believe in homeschooling and classical education. So you can learn everything, not just what the government wants you to know. Let's keep going.
People in his regiment that don't align with his views. And just because he had to rub shoulders with people with differing viewpoints doesn't mean he wasn't a socialist or a Nazi or whatever, right? So this second question is neither here nor there.
True.
And unfortunately, Weber doesn't provide any examples of the anti-socialist expressions that Hitler supposedly said.
They never
so
do.
I'm curious to know if they were actually anti-socialist or whether they were typical of the disputes raging at the time within the socialist camp, since the Social Democratic Party split into various factions as a result of the ideological flaws inherent within Marxist socialism, something I discussed in depth in the Weimar series. In a similar vein, a lot of people will give me a quote of Hitler saying he doesn't like Marxists or Marxism, and say, see, he hated socialists, so he couldn't have been
Didn't like
one.
Marxists.
But no, he's criticizing Marxism,
That's right.
not socialism itself. Marxist socialism is but one variant of a whole spectrum of socialist.
That's right. So it would be like a conservative Democrat versus a liberal Democrat. That's all. It's just a different type of communism. Hitler didn't like Marxism because it was the Russian form, and he wanted his own German form of communism, which he felt was better. Of course, Germans always think they're better, right? And they make better cars, they're better engineers. So he just assumed, hey, we do everything better, so we're better than those Bolsheviks, those mongrels, according to Hitler. So he didn't want the Jewish form of Bolshevism, the what he called Jewish Marxism. He wanted German communism, which was called National Socialism, not Nationalsozialismus in German. Yeah. So verstehen Sie das alles? Okay.
Movements. The argument I'm making is that Hitler was a socialist, but not a Marxist socialist. He hated Marxists because he didn't think they were real socialists, just like Marxists think that everything is not real socialism. So when Weber says Hitler made anti-socialist comments, is that another case of Hitler criticizing certain socialist individuals or factions of socialists, or is it a case of him hating on socialism itself? Because I suspect that if he did make such statements, that he didn't criticize the idea of socialism itself. But more importantly, this argument falls flat because we know that Hitler was elected twice into the Bavarian Soviet republics. So even on the off chance that he was genuinely anti-socialist in 1915,
So
which I
again,
doubt,
Hitler was elected twice into the Bavarian Socialist Republics, basically a communist organization. Guys, they don't teach you this in college. They don't teach you this anywhere in American schools, right? I mean, why do you think that is? Why do you think that these college professors who like it when their students wear Che Guevara t-shirts and they like to wear hammer and sickle flags, why do you think it is that they don't teach any of this stuff? I wonder.
but let's just assume that for a moment, then it makes even less sense why he would suddenly spout socialist ideology and get elected into the Bavarian Soviets. Surely his
Das
fellow
ist Treue,
soldiers would
Montana Kid,
know
yeah?
he was anti-socialist.
Das ist Treue.
So more likely he wasn't anti-socialist in 1915, even if he disputed some of the socialist policies or whatever it was that he said.
No
Also,
problem.
we
anytime.
know he attended the funeral of Kurt Eisner, who was Jewish. So the same logic could apply to this. If he was an anti-Semite later, how come he wasn't an anti-Semite earlier? Well, perhaps it's because he changed his mind. Maybe he wasn't an anti-Semite in early 1919, but became one later that year. In fact, that's what the evidence suggests.
It is. As a lawyer,
And similarly, if
definitely
he
say
was
that.
anti-socialist in 1915, then
let's understand
Republics.
something. So the Marxists on the college campuses will say, well, it doesn't make any sense. If Hitler was really a communist, how is it that he all of a sudden didn't like Jews anymore? He would have hated Jews back then too. That's the argument that they give you. But I'll share something with you. I had a good friend of mine, and his father was stabbed to death on a bus by a black man. And his father was a hardcore liberal, and he marched with King, I guess, in the civil rights rallies. And so their kids, like my buddy Mike, were brought up to be pro-black and support black people. But after his father was stabbed to death by a black guy, he then hated black people for the rest of his life and basically blamed every black person for the death of his father. So, and that's just one example, but there are plenty of anecdotal examples of where somebody loves something and then later hates it, right? And I'm sure you can think of plenty of examples, right? There, like, for example, guys who grew up straight and had a bad experience with a woman and then decided that they were gay. I've heard stories like that. So, I mean, there's probably a million more examples you can come up with. So it's definitely plausible that he could have had no problem with Jewish people and then later not like them. I mean, it's just common sense. But let's let him give his explanation.
So even on the off chance that he was genuinely anti-socialist in 1915, which I doubt, but let's just assume that for a moment, then it makes even less sense why he would suddenly spout socialist ideology and get elected into the Bavarian Soviets. Surely his fellow soldiers would know he was anti-socialist. So more likely he wasn't anti-socialist in 1915, even if he disputed some of the socialist policies or whatever it was that he said. Also, we know he attended the funeral of Kurt Eisner, who was Jewish.
Right.
So the same logic could apply to this. If he was an anti-Semite later, how come he wasn't an anti-Semite earlier? Well, perhaps it's because he changed his mind. Maybe he wasn't an anti-Semite in early 1919, but became one later that year. In fact, that's what the evidence suggests. And similarly, if he was anti-socialist in 1915, then maybe he was pro-socialist by 1919. He changed his mind about the Jews, so maybe he could change his mind about socialism too. And interestingly, Weber himself says exactly this elsewhere in his own book. However, his widely articulated ideas had not yet in 1916 made the transformation from merely bitterly extolling the stupidity of a military enemy and the House of Habsburgs towards expressing National Socialist ideas as found in Mein Kampf. In short, Hitler might have acquired most of his subsequent rhetorical style by this point. He might also have harbored fantasies about a political career. His political ideas, as expressed to others, were, it seems, still limited to an expression of some pan-German ideas and to venting of frustration about the battlefield adversaries of the List regiment. Hitler clearly changed his mind regarding the Jews in 1919, and it seems that he also changed his mind about Marxism, which he then decided was a Jewish plot.
Right.
Contrary to the accepted Marxist interpretation, Hitler was not an opponent of Marxism and did not want to destroy it because he was inimical to Labour, but because he was caught up in the insane idea that Marxism was an instrument of the Jews for the achievement of world domination, and above all because he rejected internationalism, pacifism, and the negation of the personality principle by Marxism. Perhaps he only perceived that the Social Democrats and Communists were part of a so-called Jewish conspiracy as a result of the growing belief throughout Germany in mid to late 1919 that this was what was happening. Thus, following the crowd, he turned away from those so-called Jewish variants of socialism and then joined a socialist movement that was based on German nationalism and race. That could be a better explanation.
Right. And so socialism is like communism light, right? So it's like the next step towards communism. And so he rejected Marxism, and then ultimately he was thinking, why is it that, it's always the Jewish guys that are running the show? I'm pissed. I want my own form of German communism. But then he decided, you know what? I'm going to go with a lighter version, socialism. It's an easier sell. It'll be easier for me to get into political power as well. And let's watch. And look, Jody Shiloh points out that Hitler might have been a homosexual, it might have been gay, and there is evidence of that. And we know that a lot of the people that he surrounded himself with, like Ernst Röhm, were hardcore gay, but they were not like the fairy gay like you would find on a college campus here in the United States. They were more like the Spartan gay, like the masculine, tough guy gay, like you'd see in the 300 movie. I mean, for lack of a better word, I'm just trying to give you explanations of like they supported strong, masculine, guys that were into fencing, guys with their faces all tore up from getting sliced open. That was like considered to be like really masculine, to have scars on your face from fencing. Anyways, let's get into this a little bit more so you can understand.
Explanation than saying, as Weber does, that Hitler just wasn't sure which way to turn in early 1919 and was confused. Because yes, it's Madman Hitler time. No, I'm not accepting that excuse. Another book, Death by Democracy by Het, also tries to excuse Hitler's socialism. How do we square this with Hitler's later record? It is possible that at this early point he could accommodate himself to any government with a collectivist ideology, of the right or left. More likely, it was simple opportunism. Private Hitler did not want to return to his pre-war life of poverty and isolation. The army had become his home as well as his employer, and if staying in it meant serving a radical socialist government, so be it. Right. He hated Marxists with a passion, but was willing to join them in 1919 because he didn't want to leave the army, even though he could have joined the Freikorps or some other nationalist organization, or just not gone into politics and have just stayed in his regiment. But no, he was such an opportunist that he decided not to look for other opportunities. Well, the alternative to this argument is much simpler. He was a socialist and remained so throughout his life. That would actually be the best conclusion here. But of course, we're not allowed to consider that option.
Of course not.
Hitler's shift from revolutionary socialism to the anti-Semitic far right is important to, oh yes, that's right, he can't be on the left because Hitler hated the Jews. And we know that no socialist ever hated the Jews. Nope, none whatsoever. Except Karl Marx did, so did Stalin, and so did Lenin as well, actually, and most of the members of the Labour Party. Are we just going to ignore the fact that anti-Semitism is a left-wing position? Are we going to ignore the fact that Hitler was a revolutionary and that National Socialism conducted a failed revolution in 1923 and a successful one in 1933? Also, Hitler implemented far more socialist policies than the Social Democrats ever did.
That's true.
Are we just going to ignore all that because we don't want anyone to realize that anti-Semitism is fundamental to socialist ideology? Christ drove the Jewish money changers out of the temple, and that the money changers of our age enlisted on the side of tyranny happen again to be Jews is perhaps no more than a historic coincidence.
Karl Marx.
As Samuels writes, racial intolerance against Jews plays little part in the question of whether Hitler's own beliefs were more right-wing or left-wing, since historically the socialist movement from day one has been hostile to the Jews and their capital merchant culture. Unsurprisingly, Ian Kershaw gives a very similar view to Het in his biography of Hitler. After providing evidence that Hitler was elected into the Soviet Council's Republic, Kershaw writes, "How to interpret this evidence is, nevertheless, not altogether clear. Because having swallowed the blue pill, he can't accept what the facts are telling him. Instead of admitting that nationalism and anti-Semitism are actually left-wing ideas, Kershaw dismisses this and says, ideological muddle-headedness, political confusion, and opportunism combine frequently to produce fickle and shifting allegiances." No, the only muddle-headedness here is the historians who can't fathom why glorious socialism and communism might not be what they dream it is. Also, while we're on the subject, the reason why you can't define fascism, Kershaw, is because you're denying what's at the beating heart of it, socialism. That's why Kershaw also doesn't like the idea of Hitler being a socialist who formed his own racist nationalist version of socialism. If, as seems almost certain, Hitler felt compelled to lean outwardly towards the majority Social Democrats during the revolutionary months, it was not prompted by conviction, but by sheer opportunism, aimed at avoiding, for as long as possible, demobilization from the army. I see. So the reason Hitler got into power in 1933 and implemented more socialist policies than anyone else before him in the history of Germany, including both the socialists and the communists, was because he was trying not to be demobilized. Really? Is that the conclusion we're really coming to, Kershaw? Kershaw then speculates, with no evidence at all, that
Zero
Hitler was
evidence.
against the left at this time, which is why the soldiers voted for him, contradicting what he stated earlier in his book about them being in favour of the socialist government. In other words, we have a Marxist historian floundering to explain away the reality that Hitler was a communist
Typical,
in
Professor.
1919.
Typical.
Hitler was probably known to those around him, at least towards the end of April, which is after he was elected the first time, for the counter-revolutionary he really was, whose actual sympathies were indistinguishable from those of the white troops preparing to storm the city. Again, no evidence here, just speculation. Also, he was elected into the socialist government before April, February in fact, so this is more clutching at straws. Also, if Hitler was a counter-revolutionary, why wasn't he fighting with the supposed counter-revolutionary troops, the Freikorps? Why instead was he elected into the revolutionary government? Why did he never join the forces of counter-revolution and instead mounted his own revolution in 1933 with a failed one in 1923? Again, speculation and a dismissal of the evidence because the facts don't fit into Kershaw's blue-pilled worldview.
That's the problem.
Historian
And that's
Richard
why the
Evans,
left is a proponent of censorship, because they don't like it that people like this guy who's speaking right now have a voice. That they have such zealotry in their far left position that they need to silence their political enemies. And you heard what's her name, Kamala, saying that we need to silence people, we need to censor Twitter, we cannot have any statements other than what is government approved. Right? That's the problem that I have with the left today. Is when I was a Democrat, we were the party of anti-business. We were the party of free speech, anti-censorship, anti-pharma. And now the new modern left is exactly the opposite of the Democrat Party that I was a member of. And we see it's just like unbelievable to me. If you're capable of critical thinking and you're watching this video, if you're capable of any type of critical thinking, you're probably having a come to Jesus moment right now. Keep watching if you're someone who's not totally brainwashed by the religious zealotry of UCLA Journalism School or USC or Harvard Journalism School or Harvard Law. If you're someone who's actually capable of critical thinking, join us at Team MPE, and you can have more critical thought and be around other people who actually praise the concept of having free thought.
The historian, who has his roots in the Marxist tradition, gives a detailed history of the Bavarian Soviet republics, yet doesn't even mention that Hitler was elected into them in 1919. He takes Hitler's view, clearly incorrect, that his first interest in politics came as he joined the German Workers' Party in September 1919. I can't imagine why a historian who has his roots in the Marxist tradition would do this, but what's really interesting is that Evans says this. While conventional right-wing politicians delivered lectures or spoke in a style that was orotund and pompous, flat and dull, or rough and brutish, Hitler followed the model of social democratic orators such as Eisner, or the left-wing agitators from whom he later claimed to have learned in Vienna.
That's right.
Well, isn't that strange? Yes, he might have listened to these socialists in Vienna, but also he might have listened to them during his stint as a socialist and communist in early 1919.
Of course.
I mean, Hitler attended Kurt Eisner's funeral, so maybe he heard him speak during his time in the Bavarian People's State. Did Kurt Eisner ever go to Vienna before the war? If not, then the only opportunity Hitler would have had to hear him speak would have been during late 1918 and early 1919, just when he was elected into the Soviets. So why aren't we allowed to put two and two together here? Why must we excuse and ignore the growing convergence of evidence? What these historians are forgetting is that during this time, various social democratic groups were trying to bring the ideas of socialism and nationalism together.
That's right.
At the same time, deviant socialist movements were deemed right-wing extremists and similar by so-called
course.
orthodox Marxists.
Of course.
In fact, this practice still goes on, with Noam Chomsky calling Lenin and the Bolsheviks right-wing in a speech given in 1989. And we have an Orwell quote where non-Moscow socialists were being called Trotsky fascists during the Spanish Civil War. So
Right.
this is a common occurrence with socialist factions.
Orwell was a communist
One
as
wonders,
well.
given this, why Hitler would be regarded as more of a right-wing socialist or revolutionary conservative than a left-wing socialist. Hitler proposed calling his socialism a type of national social democracy. And finally, as Ian Kershaw himself admits, Hitler only started hating on the Bolsheviks and the Jews in the summer of 1919, after the fall of the Bavarian Soviet republics. So, the evidence points clearly to the fact that Hitler was a communist in early 1919.
That's right.
Both the Marxist-influenced historians and the National Socialist ones will, of course, try to excuse their way out of this for ideological and financial reasons.
Yeah.
But by doing so, they're just highlighting the fact that they carry a deep ideological agenda to push the idea that there is a separation from so-called real socialism
Real
and the
communism.
other
Real
variants of
socialism.
socialism that they do not like. Well, good for them, but not on my watch. If you want to learn about all the socialism Hitler implemented during his time in power, check out my 5-hour video on Hitler's socialism, and
Great
to learn more about
video.
the political and economic situation in the early Weimar years, including the key split between the various socialist factions, check out my Weimar hyperinflation series. Thanks for watching, bye for now.
So I'm tempted to do this 5-hour video with you guys tonight, but we just don't have the time. But it's safe enough. Look, I've gotten enough people's interest piqued. Again, I'm not a Nazi. I don't support the Nazis. I support a constitutional republic where the rights of the individual are supreme. I am a natural law advocate. John Locke would be one of the people that I would look up to as one of the most thought-provoking and hero-like figures in my life. And Hobbes would be more like the Marxist, communist, one world, new world order, globalist guy. And so he would be the opposite of natural law, of John Locke. So, and I know I've got a bunch of people here who are just like religiously zealots, who have probably spent most of their lives in a communist style re-education camp that we call colleges, who are just like writhing. They're so upset because I've been able to expose the fact that not only was Hitler a communist, but he probably changed his political philosophy to become socialist later on. And then, of course, to you guys, that's impossible for someone to change their political ideology. But I did it. I was a Democrat most of my life, and I changed to becoming a libertarian. I was totally disenfranchised by the Democrat Party when they started supporting big pharma and big tech and wanting to censor people and saying that natural medicine is no good and that you shouldn't even talk about it. Because I'm all about natural medicine, natural healing, all the things that the Democrat Party and the hippies used to support. So, the only place that I could go is the libertarian side. Because of the fact that I don't even want to be political. I think they should abolish both parties. They're controlled by billionaires, and the ones who support and control the Democrats now, unfortunately, are guys like Bill Gates, sociopaths, and guys like George Soros, somebody who actually helped Nazis round up his fellow Hungarian Jews. Terrible, terrible stuff. And so, but here's another comparison between the Nazis and the modern Democrat Party. Their support of these radical Muslims, like the people over like Hamas, right? Terrorists who went into Israel and butchered hundreds of Israelis. And now on college campuses, all you see is all these college kids, they're being fomented and whipped up by their college professors, Marxists, to hate Jewish people and to hate Israel, burning Israeli flags, refusing to let Jewish professors go to their classrooms. Unbelievable stuff. And really makes me upset because, again, some of my best friends, people who helped me become a lawyer, are Jewish. And, like Israeli Jews. And it just makes me sick to my stomach, because I lost some friends over there during that attack, which are media and people like AOC and Ilhan Omar says is all just made up and it's disinformation. Look, those people were massacred, guys. They put little babies and did terrible stuff to them. I don't want to talk about it. It makes me sick what happened to them. But let's learn a little bit about Hitler's connection with the Muslims, and you'll kind of see a parallel between the modern Democrats and the Muslims. Like, Obama giving billions of dollars to the Iranians, like the world's largest sponsor of terror, giving them money. That's kind of interesting. So let's take a look at this video. It's only 9 minutes.
At the height of World War II, with Hitler's armed forces extended through countries he'd already crushed, the Nazis recruited tens of thousands of Muslim soldiers. This dramatic departure from reliance on so-called Aryan German troops happened first on the Eastern Front against the Soviet Union.
During the summer of 1941, over 4 million Soviet soldiers were captured by the German armed forces. Many of those were Muslim, and many of those were given the opportunity after capture to join their captors, and many took it.
Hitler's claim that his conquering armies would be purely German was also turned on its head in Yugoslavia. In this riveting story, a rare eyewitness from inside the Waffen-SS recalls how this brutal, ultra-racist force not only recruited 40,000 Muslims, but then went out of its way to meet their spiritual and cultural needs.
Was die Freiheit Their freedom of religious practice as Muslims had already been established. The ban on eating pork, prayers at least so many times a day, funeral duties, and until the end, that was all held to. It was absolutely no problem.
Absolut kein Problem.
Although far more Muslims fought with the Allies than with Hitler, not least across the Middle East and North Africa, the creation of Hitler's Muslim legions is one of the more intriguing and remarkable stories of World War II. It all began in June 1941, when Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union. To that point, the greatest military invasion in history.
In 1941, when Hitler attacked Russia, the general expectation was that the police wouldn't last for more than about 6 weeks. And the famous phrase was, "We'll kick the door in and the house will fall down."
But, says Professor Norman Stone, Hitler and his generals had made gigantic miscalculations, not least over the massive casualties they would suffer, and the need for reinforcements.
They didn't plan it in a strategic way because they thought they would win the war in the summer. And then once it drags on, they're forced into a position where they have to start recruiting to augment their own ranks, because they'd started off with an army which was really much too small for the job. And after all, they were having to keep troops in Greece, keep troops in France, troops in Norway, troops all over the place. They were desperately overstretched and they needed local help.
The German armed forces took millions of Soviet prisoners. Among them were many Muslims from the southern Soviet republics. But their conditions in captivity were appalling, and most faced a stark choice: a slow and dreadful death, or changing sides.
Hitler and Goering and company didn't really propose to waste food, as they called it, on Russian prisoners of war, so they were starving. And cases of cannibalism. 5-6 of them died in horrible circumstances. And if you are starving like that, and then somebody comes along and says, volunteer to drive the donkeys for the German army in Krasnogorsk or some such place, you might well act in that way.
The new recruits were from places like Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. It's estimated that 150,000 Muslim troops joined the Nazi ranks on the Eastern Front. They were known as willing helpers, and to start with, says Jonathan Trigg, author of A History of the Nazis' Islamic Forces, these Muslims did only auxiliary work.
Soviet soldiers who happened to be Muslim were captured, were kept in the front line by their German captors in order to carry rations, carry weapons, and then over time, those individuals went from carrying rations to carrying guns.
To what extent was there an anti-Soviet motivation among the Muslim recruits from the southern republics?
That was a very strong motivation indeed. In the previous 20 years, the Soviet communist system had hugely oppressed their religion and the peoples themselves. So many saw, falsely of course, that Hitler and the German army were there to liberate them.
And as the German army began inducting thousands of these Muslims, commanders were ordered to honor the Islamic beliefs and culture of their new recruits.
They were allowed to practice their own religion.
So there's a little bit of historical misinformation in this report. It wasn't that they were being allowed into the German army. They were being let into the SS, the Schutzstaffel, the armed SS, and they were let in because they were fanatics and they hated Jews. And of course, they hated the Russians because the Russians were atheists, and the Russians hated Muslims as well as Jews. But Hitler and Himmler made many statements that they wished that the Germans were Muslim because they would be more obedient, because Islam is a religion of submission. And if they just could have like a grand mufti, or Hitler was like a Muslim leader, they would be able to conquer the world because they're so submissive. And if they could have their caliphate under the German flag, Hitler and Himmler both felt that they would be unstoppable. These are facts that this video is not really talking about. Let's get into it a little more.
Which was still anathema within the Soviet armed forces. So they had their own imams, they could pray as and when required under the laws of Islam, and of course they had special rations, so they weren't given alcohol or given pork.
As the Germans increasingly met fierce Soviet resistance, they lost from their own ranks 1 million fighting men, dead or injured. So the need to build new fighting units from their Muslim recruits was urgent.
The really prominent unit formed, first of all, was the Turkmen division. And that, if you like, was an amalgamation of a whole series of battalions and regiments, eventually numbering over 20,000 men. The Turkmen division was moderately successful. It wasn't equipped or trained to be an elite unit, but neither was it a disaster.
But at the heart of this recruitment of Muslims lay a massive contradiction. Hitler had earlier decreed that none but Germans should bear arms to enforce the world domination he dreamed of by the mythical Aryan race.
Hitler himself wasn't particularly keen on having anything other than blonde, blue-eyed Germans fighting for him, or at least people with a kind of Germanic background, like, say, the Dutch or the Belgian Flemish. But he was more or less forced into a position of having to accept that there were other people. And after all, he was in alliance with the Japanese, who were hardly Aryan.
And, at the outset at least, none in the Nazi armed forces were more pedantic on the issue of race than the special Nazi Party army, the Waffen-SS, and their ultimate supremo, Heinrich Himmler.
In the Waffen-SS, Himmler and his entourage would carry out a whole series of checks on individuals, both on their racial ancestry. So, for instance, officers would have to develop their family tree back to 1750 to ensure that there was no Jewish blood there. They would also have all of their photos viewed individually by Himmler to see, did they actually look Aryan enough?
But events and the need for military manpower soon dictated a loosening of these rigid criteria, and Himmler was forced to come to terms with recruiting Muslims who bore no resemblance to the Aryan stereotype.
In a racial context, the recruitment of significant Muslim units in the German armed forces is incredible, particularly with Himmler's views on race. The Waffen-SS itself was very much seen at its inauguration as being the racial pinnacle of the Aryan nation, if you like. Everyone was the super tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed giant, very much the epitome of the master race. So therefore, the recruitment of very large numbers of Muslims, particularly from the southern Soviet Union, Turkic peoples, and so on, is very much the antithesis of that racial illusion.
But there turned out also to be a need to recruit other Muslims far away from the Eastern Front, in Yugoslavia. And to help them in that task, the Nazis could turn to an unlikely figure from the Middle East, who came to Germany in 1941. His name was Hajj Amin al-Husseini, but more crucial was his title, the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. He was from a leading Palestinian family and had become an important political and religious player, says Dr. Taj Hargey of the Muslim Educational Centre in Oxford.
He quickly rose to be an influential figure in Mandate Palestine. In the interwar period between 1920 to 1939, he is the leading Arab voice in Palestine, resisting what he considered Jewish illegal immigration to his homeland, and also fought against the establishment of a national Jewish homeland in Palestine.
The Mufti came to believe that the main obstacles facing the Arabs in Palestine were the Jews, the British, and the Communists, a lineup of enemies coinciding very closely with Hitler's own hit list.
The Grand Mufti went to Berlin to gain material and moral support from the Nazis. He was exceptionally well treated. He was given his own accommodation, unlimited funds. He was allowed to meet with propagandists, both from the Nazi side as well as from the Arab side, to convince Muslims in Palestine and wider Arab world that Muslim solidarity was with the Nazis, with the Axis powers, rather than with the Allied powers.
That's right, guys. And so let me give you some fun facts. So to this day, the salute for the Palestinian Liberation Organization is the Nazi salute. And there are a lot of other things. The Nazis were given aid and comfort by the Egyptians, the Syrians, the Lebanese, Muslims after the war. And SS units, SS leaders taught some of the Muslim special forces units how to fight. A lot of people don't really understand how closely they were connected. So anyways, the point of the show tonight was, we have the left-wing news media out saying that Trump is a Nazi. And so I just wanted to, as a libertarian and a nonpartisan, I wanted to show you, well, wait a minute, the Democrats are more like the Nazis today than Trump is. I mean, they support Hamas. I mean, Hamas and the Nazis were buddies, right? PLO. They support abortion, euthanasia. I mean, all the same stuff that the Nazi Party supported. They support racism against white people, and the Germans supported racism against Jews. So it's, when you look at the comparisons, I would say that the Democrats more closely resemble Nazis than Trump. I mean, Trump's family is Jewish. He was able to make Jerusalem the capital of Israel, which really pissed off the UN, which is basically run by Muslims, and really pissed off the World Economic Forum. We know that the WEF was flooding, Germany as well as the UK with jihadists, military-age jihadists. You go to Ireland or the UK right now, and it doesn't even look like England. When I used to live in Scotland, it looks like a flea market somewhere in Egypt or Afghanistan, and the women are terrified. Assaults against women are up through the roof. If you walk your dog, that's considered to be haram, and you'll get attacked in some areas. This is just based on news reports. So we know that the left is really supporting policies and philosophies more like the Germans did in the 20s and 30s. And so I wanted to also prove to you beyond a shadow of a doubt that Adolf Hitler was in fact a communist. And ultimately, that's why Germany was called the National Socialist Party. And so I know a lot of you guys are going to say, yeah, well, the businesses were privatized under Hitler, which is nonsense. I mean, the state controlled the means of production, and high party officials were the only ones allowed to run those businesses. You had to be a Nazi. And so no different than how it was in the Soviet Union with McKay and Gurevich building aircraft. Sure, it was called McCoy and Gurevich, but it was still Russian. It was still the state controlling the means of the production. And the fact that Hitler sold stocks, well, yeah, it was sold stocks to other Nazis and from a Nazi-run business. I mean, you call that privatization? It's not like a non-German Aryan company could buy stock, so there was no free market at all. But in the 5-hour video about Hitler socialism, which I will, let me see if I can find that here for you guys really quick. Oh gosh, well, I don't see it here, but I'll pull it up for you guys. We'll do one last video. It's 5 minutes, and then we'll call it a night because I got to get to work still. But hopefully you guys learned something so far. So hopefully you've learned that everything that the Marxist-run college campuses in the United States has taught you is a lie, which you probably already knew if you've watched my channel. And so for all of you guys who spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on that worthless piece of paper, who served me coffee at Starbucks, I'm sure you're really upset, but the bottom line is what I'm saying is factual and true, and what you were taught was a lie. So just read it and weep and start learning, start becoming critical thinkers. And this next video that we're going to watch is going to kind of get into the anti-Semitism of the modern Democrat Party and how closely the modern Democrat Party's anti-Semitism is to Germany's anti-Semitism in the 1930s and 40s. Let's get into it, guys. It's unbelievable how similar it is. If you can't see the similarities, you've got to take off the rose-colored communist glasses that you've been taught since kindergarten.
On this vote, the yeas are 412, the nays are 10, 6 recorded as present.
After Congress overwhelmingly passed a resolution condemning Hamas for its attack in southern Israel October 7th, New Jersey Democrat Josh Gottheimer took to X to say the 15 Democrats who did not vote for the measure were despicable and do not speak for the party. He was only half right. Those 15 younger members from progressive constituencies may in fact represent the Democratic future. The party of Franklin D. Roosevelt has an anti-Semitism problem.
Israel does have a right to self-defense. I think what we need to take a look at in this situation is if collective punishment qualifies as defense.
This week, progressive activist groups released a Gaza 2024 statement, asserting they will not vote for Joe Biden if he continues to support Israel's genocidal attacks in Gaza.
The American people are actually quite far away from where the president and even Congress, the majority of Congress, has been on Israel and Gaza.
We must, without equivocation, denounce anti-Semitism. We must also, without equivocation, denounce Islamophobia.
It's time to revisit the subject of false equivalence.
1,400 people murdered by terrorists in cold blood in the most gruesome of ways that we haven't seen in 75 years. You don't see the same type of support because no other reason than we're Jewish.
From the river to the sea! When they say from the river to the sea, they say without any Jews.
We weren't even given proper time to grieve. Protests started the next day in America, anti-Israel.
Will you feel safe on the campus of NYU?
I'm still struggling with that. Part of me feels that somebody needs to be there because if nobody's there, then who's the only voice?
The October 7th attack on Israel is often described in media reports as the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust. But that phrase manifestly has no meaning or resonance for many recently educated Americans. It is an abstraction. So a reminder for those who forget. The Jewish Holocaust ran from 1933 to 1945. It was what Germany's Nazi party under Adolf Hitler called the final solution to the Jewish question.
Just shortly after the Kristallnacht pogrom on the 30th of January 1939, Hitler said, in the event of another world war, the result will not be the victory of the Jews and of Bolshevism, but
Ian Kershaw is kind of a
eradication
propagandist.
of
He's not
Jewry throughout
100%.
Europe.
Some 6 million Jews were murdered at concentration camps during the Holocaust. And in the years since, Jewish leaders and writers have tried to keep its memory alive in the belief that the human poison of Jew hatred is never dead, but remains dormant. They were right.
Hamas, Al-Qaeda, and ISIS are all there together, wishing to ban us all from the face of the earth. And if it starts with Israel and it starts with the Jews, it will never end there. Europe will be next.
Europe's already going
The
downhill.
Biden administration's support for Israel has been firm because its representatives recognize the direct line between the 1930s and October 7th. But the insistence by party activists on an Israel-Gaza equivalence is false.
How do you look at one atrocity and say this is wrong? But you watch as bodies pile up, as neighborhoods are leveled.
October 7 was the return after 80 years of Jewish extermination, an explicit goal of both Hamas and Iran, whose Ayatollah Khamenei sits placidly pondering the completion of the final solution.
In just the past few weeks, multiple foreign terrorist organizations have called for attacks against Americans and the West. ISIS urged its followers to target Jewish communities in the United States and Europe.
The Hamas person-by-person massacre is an event on a scale far beyond any other standard U.S. political issue. The question is whether the embrace of anti-Semitism by so many of the Democratic Party's rank and file will finally push them over the line with voters, not least the historically reliable Jewish vote.
The ground action actually creates the possibility, not the certainty, but the possibility of getting our hostages out.
Best case, President Biden would explicitly and publicly drive a stake through the heart of the anti-Semitism rising within his party.
They would rather embrace anti-Semitism within their ranks than upset their liberal base.
Cynics will reply that the anyone but Trump factor is always out there, but don't count on it. Rationally, many large Jewish donors have already pulled the plug on Harvard, Columbia, and Penn. The party of FDR could be next.
There's a point where cowardice becomes...
So again, I see a lot of comments, really emotional comments in the sidebar. You've got the Muslims and the anti-Jewish Democrats. And then you have people who are Jewish who are really upset. I'm just encouraging all you guys to be civil with each other. The point of this video was to point out that you've got the Democrats calling Trump a Nazi, but yet the modern Democrat Party's ideals more closely align with Hitler's. And we also have the inconvenient fact that Hitler was actually a communist, and the National Socialist Party was a socialist party. And despite what historical revisionists have to say, and leftist college professors say, trying to present to him as right wing, the fact of the matter is Hitler was not right wing. Hitler was a leftist, and he supported the same types of philosophies that modern Democrats support, from abortion to euthanasia. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I can't even racism against other people, like critical race theory. It teaches you that white people are oppressors and that everyone else is oppressed. Well, the Nazis taught that Jewish people were oppressors and that the Germans were the oppressed. I mean, it's right out of the Nazi playbook, as far as I'm concerned, in my humble opinion. So give me a bunch of ones if you see the similarities are more closely related to this new branch of the Democrat Party, the Ilhan Omar branch of the Democrat Party, than Trump's. I mean, Trump actually helped Israel get Jerusalem as their capital, and most of his family are Jewish, and a lot of his friends are Jewish, and he was always considered to be a friend of the black community until he became a Republican, and then they started accusing him of being a racist, right? And then we showed you a video the other night where that thing about him saying there were good people on both sides was chopped up by CNN, and misinformation was put out there trying to portray him as a racist. But people who are critical thinkers know that's just because he ran as a Republican and not a Democrat. And even Snopes agreed that that Kamala at the debate lied, and even though she knew that what she was saying was false, she lied. And there's a fact check from Snopes saying that story about him saying there were good people on both sides means that he's racist was proven false. That's Snopes, a far left group of fact checkers who are hardcore Marxist Democrats. Let's finish this video up.
Complicity, and they're way past that point.
Right. So anyways, guys, again, the intent wasn't to create this firestorm of people getting upset, but it's all over the news that Trump is a Nazi because he wanted to hold a rally in Madison Square Garden. And so what I did tonight is show you historical facts showing that actually the people accusing Trump of being a Nazi, their philosophy more closely aligns with the Nazi party of the 1930s and the 1940s than Trump's do. And I am a libertarian. I don't support either political party. I'm a recovering Democrat. I am a classical liberal in the nature of a Hayek or a Thomas Jefferson. And I'm really upset that the modern Democrat Party has become the party of censorship and silencing your political enemies, the party of lawfare, trying to target your political enemies with criminal charges and lawsuits, the same way that the Soviets did. You know, the Soviet Union was famous. Stalin's top prosecutor was famous for saying, "Show me the man and I'll show you the crime." We saw that the woman who went after Trump, both of them actually ran, they're both Soros funded prosecutors, ran their campaigns on getting Trump, right? Getting Trump. That was the whole point of that. That's how they raised funds in violation of the lawyer code of ethics to get someone, to put someone in jail, to get charges against them because of their political beliefs. And so I just ask all of you to use critical thinking and understand that I'm not here to support either political party, but to merely demonstrate that everything that you've been taught in school is a lie. Now, I did see a comment from a woman in Ireland saying that everything that I said about Ireland is a lie. Well, I have friends who live in Belfast, and I also have friends who live in Dublin, and so I talk to them all the time. I used to live in Motherwell, Scotland, and what I'm hearing is that Ireland is very dangerous now compared to how it was, that there are military-aged males that make people feel unsafe, and that the government is locking people up for disagreeing with this mass migration that's being forced on the Irish people by their World Economic Forum sponsored government. And so, look, you have the right to your opinion, but just because you live in Ireland doesn't mean you speak for all Irish people. The Irish people that I talk to say the exact opposite of what you're saying. So, and I'm going to go with what they're saying because they're lifelong friends who I sponsor and hostel when they travel. And I am a traveler, and I've been all around the world, and I used to live in Europe. And based upon my friends and what I'm hearing right now about Europe, well, for example, in Sweden, the assaults against women are up by like 600% to the point now where they're starting to deport these jihadis that their government forced upon the local population. They immediately go on welfare. They immediately have children. They don't want to work. They'll pray in the middle of the streets, even though there are mosques everywhere, to try to show domination and to try to bring, according to what my friends are saying, they're trying to form a caliphate in these European countries. And I've seen speeches where they're talking right out in the middle of the public malls saying that that's what they want. And some of the women are so terrified that they're converting to Islam so they won't get attacked. That's what I'm hearing from people who live there. And again, you have the right to your own opinion, but I believe what my friends are saying over what somebody is saying. And then, of course, you know, Aaron and all you guys have the right to your opinion, but saying that I'm being fallaciously anecdotal when I'm showing you historic facts shows that you're probably also one of these religious zealots who believes in the religion of Marxism and socialism, because we know it is a faith-based religion to believe that stealing your neighbor's property and giving it to someone who didn't earn it is going to make the world a better place. So anyways, and that's why I am a libertarian. I believe in individual rights above all. Less government means more freedom. Get the government out of my way. There should be social safety nets, but you shouldn't be inviting people to flood your country and immediately putting them on welfare and making them dependent on the teat of government. The only way you should be allowing people into your country is if they can offer something of value other than votes for the party in power with welfare checks, votes in exchange for welfare checks, which is basically what's happening right now at our southern border, flooding our country. 6% of the Nicaraguan population, a communist country, has been brought up here by non-governmental agencies with our taxpayer dollars. And we know that the one political party is sending them into swing states. Obviously, they're doing that for a reason. And we know that the U.S. Census is how California turned blue. By flooding California with illegal aliens, they were able to change the electorate system just with body count. The illegals don't even have to vote. All they have to do is exist. So you could put 500 illegals in a blues district, and now it can break up into 2 districts and you get 2 more congressmen and senators, for example. And so that's how California went blue. And we know that that's the model that the left has for the entire country. It makes no sense that you would want to bring millions of foreigners into your country who aren't working, who are immediately going on welfare, primarily military-age males, unless there was a benefit in it for someone. And the benefit is obviously for the politicians who want to maintain political power. Give me a bunch of ones if you agree. Now, I appreciate you showing up, Jody Shiloh, and I appreciate you showing up, even you, Aaron. Obviously, you appear to be a Marxist, but I'm glad that you showed up and you have all of your nonsensical leftist arguments that you're making. You obviously didn't watch the whole show, and that's okay. You're entitled to your leftist opinion. And Forrest Goodwin, I appreciate you showing up tonight. I didn't see your comment about the Second Amendment. And let me see here. John Smith, actually, we provided hundreds of sources in the videos that we showed. I don't know where my mods are, but you guys know that when people make fallacious statements like that, I mean, I literally showed a video that had thousands of sources for this information. And so to hear somebody come in my chat and say you're not showing, that's a gaslighter. That's somebody who's probably a paid Marxist who's here to try to sow discord, which we know they do on social media all the time. And then Cam Raphael says, bro, Trump committed blah, blah, blah. Well, you might believe that, and maybe he did commit some crimes. The problem is when the prosecutor runs on the platform of getting Trump, half of the population believes that getting Trump is the reason why he was convicted. So in order for the rest of the country to believe you and your Marxist friends, they have to believe that it was fair. And obviously it wasn't fair. I mean, come on. We all know that he was politically targeted, and they basically made a martyr of him by doing that. Give me a bunch of ones for the people in this chat who actually believe in the ability to have free thought, that all that did is basically make people like Trump more who were going to vote for him. Because especially black males overwhelmingly are now coming out saying they're supporting Trump because they've been targeted too, the same way that Trump was targeted, and they don't like it. So making someone a martyr probably wasn't the best idea for your cause, for your leftist commie cause, Aaron, and these other guys who are trying to carry water for these political persecutions against Trump, like Holden B. But I appreciate everybody showing up on the chat tonight. And I'll get back to my normal Cop Watch shows. Again, the only reason I did this show tonight is because, you know, the leftist press is the enemy of the American people. And you're only getting one side of the story, which is ABC, CBS, CNN, PMSNBC, all these far left news organizations who carry water. They're basically the propaganda wing of the Democrats, saying that because Trump had a rally in Madison Garden, that means that he's a Nazi. And so I just was able to now show you with citations, points, and authorities, like a good lawyer would do, that actually, no, that's not true. In fact, the modern Democrat Party more closely resembles the Nazi Party than Trump. And so I just wanted to kind of get that out there with you. That's why so many of my Jewish friends who were Democrats have now left the party. And of course, you guys know that I was a lifelong Democrat until the Democrat Party became the party of big pharma and censorship, trying to silence their political enemies, lawfare. I just realized, oh my God, they're becoming just like Hitler. I don't want to be part of a party like that. I want people who I disagree with to have free speech. I don't want those people to be silenced. I want to know what people think so I know who I don't want to hang out with. But the new generation of Democrats, unfortunately, doesn't feel that way. They think that they're superior and that you should be shut up and silenced by any means necessary. And it just reminds me so much of Joe Stalin, the Marxists, and what the Nazis did. And so I just want all of you guys to please wake up, exercise your critical thinking, and do your own research. Stop listening to your college professors. They're mostly wrong. And you need to do your own independent research, and you'll come to the same conclusions that I have, that I've been lied to all my life by my party. Even George Orwell, he was a communist, and he said that these things would be coming from the right. But in fact, all these things that he warned us about are coming from the left, which is really, really sad, because the Democrat Party used to be the party of freedom and liberty and anti-big business. And now it's all about the big billionaires, guys like Bill Gates and big pharma and all that stuff. And, you know, I'm from the party when, you know, they taught you to eat good food, that Monsanto was bad, that spraying food with chemicals was bad, that fluoride was poison. And we just found out they finally had to admit, they finally admitted it, guys, that fluoride is poison. But for the last 20 years, I was called a conspiracy theorist by people because I wouldn't buy fluoridated toothpaste. People would laugh at me that I used baking soda to brush my teeth with mint. And now people are like, oh my God, you were right, Mike. But yeah, but I don't want to be right. I want you to be right. I want you to be safe. I love all humans. Unlike the modern leftist Democrats, I love all of you. And I want all of you to understand that you need to love one another, and we need to form parallel systems and get off the grid and stop supporting these people just because they allegedly support your political viewpoint, and start supporting people because they have good hearts and they're good people. And that's all I want you to think about. Most of the people in my show and my chats are kind, caring people. There's Democrats, there's Republicans, there's libertarians, and I don't tolerate people attacking each other or using racial epithets, all that stuff. Don't like it. But I do appreciate, again, you showing up, Jeff. And of course, Fish Fart. Snopes is a hardcore leftist run fact checker organization, like most fact checkers. I have not seen one fact checker yet who's not a hardcore leftist. I would say about 80% to 90% of journalists are hardcore leftists. Most of the educational industrial complex are leftists. So naturally, their opinions and views are going to be tilted and slanted towards that Marxist philosophy. So all of their historians and all the books you read by them are going to be biased. And that's why I always encourage all of you people to do your own independent research instead of just taking people's word for it. What really bothers me more than anything is this campus culture that if your professor told you, or some guy wrote a book, that somehow that means that it's the truth. No, it's not, guys. It's historical revisionism. You need to do your own research. So Chad, you're right. It's all theater. They're all actors, and the entire world is a stage. That's right. Jim, it's all out of the Darwinian evolution playbook. It might be. I haven't gone that far. Again, and Joe Childs, well, my understanding is that Jerusalem instead of Tel Aviv is now the capital because of Trump's intervention to help Israel. But if I'm wrong, unlike most of the Marxists and leftists that come on my channel, show me that I'm wrong and I'll be humble and admit it. Okay. That's just how I am. I'm not going to sit there and argue a position that's untenable. All that does is make me lose credibility. I learned a long time ago as a lawyer that you can humbly be disproven. And if you can be disproven and agree that you were disproven, you'll win more friends than holding on to an untenable position. You know, like Hitler said, don't give up no matter what. And he just got his people completely wiped off the map instead of listening to his generals who said, fall back and regroup and come to a different defensive line, right? So, you know, a good general is going, whether they're a Nazi or a Marine general, by the way, guys, they're going to do what's best for their troops. And I'll do what's best for you. If you can prove me wrong, fine. But if you can't, don't sit there and defend a position that's ridiculous. Campus culture is ridiculous. Trash Man says that he wasn't left wing or right wing. Well, he was a communist, so I would say that makes him left wing. He definitely was a socialist. Jody Shiloh. You know what, Jody? I always figured you were Jewish because I figured Shiloh was a Jewish name. You know what? I never really cared one way or another. Like I said, my dearest friends are Jewish, and they've never treated, and they eat with me. Okay. For all you people who think that, oh, I'm just, they just think that we're Goyim and all this stuff. There's probably a sect of Orthodox Jews who feel that way, but my dearest friends have all been Jewish, and they have all supported me. And when I was sleeping on park benches and had nothing, they were the first people who gave me a chance. So, I just don't tolerate any of this anti-Jewish stuff that's being spewed by the modern Democrat Party. It really makes me upset what they've done to the party. It's disgusting. And then Forrest Goodwin, I'm glad you showed up. Silver D5, thanks for showing up. Fish Fart, thanks for showing up, buddy. And Joe Childs. And Joe Child's border is spelled B-O-R-D-E-R, not B-O-A-R-D-E-R. Border would be like someone trying to board a ship, just so you know. And I agree that we should stop genocide as soon as we can determine what genocide means. If you mean forcing people to put stuff into their body. If you mean spraying substances on food that gives people cancer so certain companies can sell drugs to treat cancer, then I do agree we should be stopping that genocide. And Ellie Cola, thank you for showing up. And all you guys. So Bal Tuatha says, I'm Irish, and everything you just said about Ireland is a lie. Well, that means that all my Irish friends are lying. And of course, there's two Irelands, by the way. There's Orange Irish, Belfast, right, Northern Ireland. And then there's also real Ireland, Catholic Ireland, which the IRA freed. And that is now being flooded with Islamics and Ukrainians, right, guys? I believe it's Ukrainians. And so I'm hearing this, so it's 100% not lying, because I'm hearing it from other Irish people who are friends of mine of 20 years or more from when I used to live over in Europe. So, and then Chopper Man says, didn't Trump say he liked Nazi generals because of loyalty? Well, you know, Chopper Man, I've heard that before. I've heard a lot of stuff. I haven't seen the statement. I know that your friends in the communist run news media always take sentences out of context, and their communist fact checkers always go along with it, even though it's not true. So I find that statement very difficult to believe. So I'd like to know what the context was, but I know by his actions that he's been a strong supporter of Israel, and that his son-in-law is Israeli Jewish, and that most of his friends are Jewish. So I have a hard time buying anything that you're saying. To me, it just looks like politics. And again, I'm not a Trump supporter, so there you go. My father met Trump, and because of the book Art of the Deal, and Trump wouldn't shake his hand. And my dad being a Marine and me being a Swedish Lutheran like my father, we always believe in shaking hands and looking your person in the eye. And if they won't do that, we don't trust them. It's part of our culture. It's probably a lost culture, but I still have it. So, you know, I've always looked at Trump with suspicion. I think that Trump is basically a tax and spend liberal who ran as a Republican. And I think that if you would have ran as a Democrat, that you wouldn't be saying anything bad about him right now, to be quite honest. Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, they all supported him. He won awards. He actually went against a golf course who I believe wouldn't let a Jew golf. And I think he helped file a lawsuit against that golf course in favor of the Jewish guy. So it's real easy to listen to the Marxist run news media and take a few things out of context. But when you look at the big picture and look at the history, I believe that he's been treated very unfairly. And that's, as a lawyer, I just don't tolerate that. And if somebody was doing that to you, I wouldn't tolerate it either. I would stand up for you. And because that's my job as a lawyer, is to look at both sides and to look at fundamental unfairness. Unfortunately, most of you people who hate him look at it from a political point of view, and you just believe anything that you hear in the news. And I don't believe anything that I hear in the news, because it's not news. It's for-profit media. It's George Soros. It's Bill Gates. It's BlackRock, and people who just hate this guy. A lot of these people hung out on Epstein Island or went to P. Diddy parties, and they're terrified if Trump gets in that he's going to release that camera footage and take these people out. So I have some issues with you guys that you're not being fair. And so that would be the only thing that I have to say about that. And let me see if there's anybody else that I need to thank for showing up. Justin Knighton, yeah, you did hear Rammstein, and I love Rammstein. Du hast mich. It's a great song. Too bad I can't play it. I'd get a copyright strike. But if you guys get a chance, check out some Rammstein music videos. These guys are great. They do like the fire shows. Really great band. I believe they're called commercial rock or something like that. It's like something industrial music, industrial rock. Check out Rammstein if you get a chance. Really great. Let's OTVO. Thanks for showing up tonight. So anyways, with that being said, make sure to like and subscribe. Make sure to save, because you never know when the thought police are going to take down this channel. They may take it down tonight. We know that they don't like it when anybody gives a fair, neutral statement about Trump, right? We know that the YouTube community hates Orange Man, and they definitely don't want their party being compared to the Nazi party. But hey, if the shoe fits, wear it. I mean, come on, they support Hamas. They're treating Jews terribly. My friends who are Jewish terribly. And as a recovering Democrat, I feel it's my duty to speak out against the way they're treating Jews. And I really, really feel bad about what's happening in our country with this whole critical race theory movement, where public school teachers are trying to tell children that white people are oppressors and that they're oppressed. It's just terrible being someone in an interracial marriage with racially mixed children, to know that public school teachers are telling kids that their white father is an oppressor, but their black mother or their Hispanic mother is oppressed. What a joke. I mean, how disgusting. Give me a bunch of ones if you think that's uncalled for and disgusting, that public school teachers should be there to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic, not to sexualize children, not to teach them about racial theories. No, that's not what they should be doing. They should leave all their left-wing college crusader garbage at the college campuses that they graduated from and teach reading, writing, and arithmetic. Give me a bunch of ones if you agree with that. And I agree. A person made the statement about JFK being anti-war. I don't know if that's 100% true, but I believe that he was just as anti-war as Donald Trump, and we didn't see the country getting into a bunch of wars under Trump. Obviously, the military-industrial complex hated Donald Trump, and just like they hate Kennedy. And you see that both of them, one was almost assassinated, and the other one definitely was assassinated, and they still won't release the CIA files about their potential involvement in the assassination of JFK. That gives me pause for thought too, guys. And, you know, being a former Marine, an inactive United States Marine, yeah, well, that's right. Fish fart, if you want to learn science, that's why you go to school, to learn science, not learn how to hate white people or why Jews are bad, or that your son might really be a boy or girl, and your daughter, and your, you know, that someone telling you that you might really be a girl if you're a guy. That's not what school teachers are supposed to be doing. That's political garbage. That should be left for the parents to decide. Now, with respect to Vietnam, this is when I found out that the Gulf of Tonkin was a lie and completely made up. Look, my father was a Marine in Vietnam. I joined the Marines because I wanted to fight communists, just like my dad. And then I find out afterwards, after I get out of the Marine Corps, I found out a lot of other things too about the lie about weapons of mass destruction. The Gulf of Tonkin never happened. And my father died from Agent Orange, being exposed to Agent Orange. My dad was at all the frontline positions in Vietnam. And my father's death is directly attributable to our CIA lying about Gulf of Tonkin to get us into that war. And I've never trusted the government since. That's when I switched political parties to libertarian as well. I mean, if you believe anything that these government agents tell you, you got a few screws loose. My dad died from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma from exposure to Agent Orange. I will never trust anything a pharmaceutical company says. I will never trust anything that the government says again, ever, after what's happened to my family. My mother-in-law dying of thrombosis a few days after doing something that people said was perfectly safe. So I'm very, very scared for our country. I'm very scared for the young generation, that they believe anything that they're told by their college professor or their school teacher or by CNN. And I'm hoping that some of you still have a spark of intelligence left in you, and you'll support my channel and start developing critical thinking skills. That's all I'm here to do. I'm not trying to get you to support Trump or to support Kamala or any of that stuff. I'm here to teach you to be critical thinkers. And so with that being said, make sure to like and subscribe. Make sure to save, because we never know when the thought police are going to take down this channel. Semper Fi, do or die.